Welcome back, guys, to Mr. Phantom. In today's chilling episode, I'm diving into 8 true, spine-tingling horror stories from car campers deep in the heart of Appalachia. If you've ever wondered what lurks in those shadowy woods, you're in for a wild ride. Before we get started, please consider hitting that subscribe button, and don't forget to like and share this video with your friends. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I love hearing from you all. All right, let's get into these eerie tales. Here we go. Look, I'm not the type to believe in ghost stories or mountain legends. I'm a software engineer from Charlotte, and I approach most things with logic. But what happened to me and my buddy Jake in the Nantahala forest last October? I still can't explain it rationally. We'd been planning this car camping trip for months. Jake had just bought this new Subaru Outback and was dying to test out the sleeping setup he'd rigged in the back. Me? I was just happy to get away from screens for a weekend. We picked a dispersed camping spot Jake found on some overlanding forum, supposed to be this hidden gem off Forest Service Road 67, deep in the North Carolina mountains. The drive up was beautiful. October in Appalachia is something else. The maples bleeding red, the hickories going golden, everything so vibrant it almost hurts your eyes. We followed the main forest road for about 20 miles, then turned onto this narrow dirt track that climbed steadily through thick woods. The GPS lost signal after the first mile, but Jake had printed directions from the forum post. "Should be just around this next bend," he said, consulting his notes. Guy said to look for a big dead chestnut tree. We found it exactly where the directions said, a massive skeleton of a tree, probably killed by blight decades ago, standing guard over a small clearing. The site was perfect, level ground for the car, a natural windbreak of rhododendrons, and a view down the valley through a gap in the trees. We could see for miles, ridge after ridge, rolling away into blue distance. Jake backed the Outback into position while I gathered firewood. The forum post had mentioned an existing fire ring, and sure enough, there it was. A neat circle of blackened stones with fresh ash inside. Someone had been here recently. "Sweet setup," Jake said, popping the rear hatch. He'd removed the back seats and built this clever platform that converted the cargo area into a sleeping space for 2. Way better than a tent. We spent the afternoon hiking, exploring old logging roads that crisscrossed the mountainside. Found some interesting stuff. The foundation of an old cabin, mostly reclaimed by forest, and what looked like the remains of a moonshine still tucked into a rocky alcove. Classic Appalachian history. As the sun started setting, we headed back to make dinner. Jake fired up his camp stove while I got the fire going. The temperature was dropping fast. You could feel winter lurking in the air, waiting to pounce. But inside the car with our sleeping bags and Jake's portable heater, we'd be comfortable enough. That's when we first heard it. We were sitting by the fire, sharing a bottle of bourbon Jake had brought, when this sound drifted up from the valley below. At first, I thought it was wind in the trees, but then I realized what it actually was. Singing. Someone was singing down there in the dark. "You hear that?" I asked. Jake nodded, tilting his head to listen. The voice was high and thin, almost ethereal, carrying some melody I didn't recognize. It seemed to echo off the mountainsides, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Probably just some other campers," Jake said, but he didn't sound convinced. The singing continued for maybe 10 minutes, then faded away. We tried to laugh it off, but it had definitely unsettled us both. There was something haunting about that voice, something that didn't quite sound right. We killed the fire around 10 and climbed into the back of the Outback. Jake had done a good job with the setup. It was actually pretty comfortable. We lay there talking quietly, listening to the night sounds filtering through the cracked windows. Owls calling, branches creaking, the distant rustle of small animals in the underbrush. I was just starting to drift off when Jake grabbed my arm. "Dude," he whispered, "look." Through the rear window, maybe 50 yards away at the edge of the clearing, I could see a faint light bobbing between the trees. It looked like someone carrying a lantern, moving slowly through the forest. The light would appear, disappear behind a tree trunk, then reappear a little closer. "Should we say something?" I whispered back. "I don't know. Maybe they're just passing through." But the light wasn't passing through. It was circling us, staying just inside the tree line, always keeping the same distance. We watched for maybe 20 minutes as it made a complete circuit of our campsite, never coming closer, never moving away. Then it stopped. The light sat there motionless for a long moment, and I could swear I felt eyes on us, like whatever was carrying that lantern was studying us, trying to decide something. Then the singing started again. This time, it was much closer, maybe at the edge of the clearing. The same high, ethereal voice, but now I could make out that it wasn't in English. The words, if they were words, sounded older somehow, like a language that had been dead for centuries. Jake was gripping his phone so hard his knuckles were white, even though we both knew there was no signal up here. "What the hell is that?" he breathed. The singing circled us, just like the light had. Sometimes it seemed to come from the left, sometimes from behind us, sometimes from directly in front of the car. It was like the singer was moving around us in the darkness, always just out of sight. That's when I made the mistake of turning on Jake's headlights. I was trying to see who or what was out there, but the moment those beams cut through the darkness, the singing stopped. Dead silence. Even the normal forest sounds seemed to hold their breath. In the wash of the headlights, I could see our campsite clearly, the dead fire ring, the scattered firewood, the ghost of that massive chestnut tree. But at the very edge of the light, where the beams started to fade into shadow, there was something else. A figure. It stood perfectly still between two oak trees, just a dark silhouette against the deeper darkness beyond. Human-shaped but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, like someone had stretched a person out like taffy. And even though I couldn't make out any features, I knew it was watching us. "Turn them off," Jake whispered urgently. "Turn them off right now." But I couldn't move. I was transfixed by that shape at the edge of the light. It hadn't moved since the headlights came on, hadn't even swayed with the wind. It just stood there like a statue, and the longer I stared, the more wrong it looked. Jake reached over and shut off the lights himself. The darkness crashed back over us like a wave, and immediately the singing resumed. But now it sounded different, faster, more agitated, like whatever was out there was angry that we'd tried to look at it. "We need to get out of here," Jake said, his voice tight with fear. "And go where? We can't drive these mountain roads in the dark. We'll end up wrapped around a tree." He knew I was right, but neither of us was going to sleep. We spent the rest of the night huddled in the back of the outback, listening to that voice circle us in the darkness. Sometimes it was close enough that I could hear individual syllables. Sometimes it faded until it was barely audible, but it never stopped completely. Around 3 a.m., Jake fell asleep from exhaustion despite everything. I stayed awake, watching the windows, jumping at every sound. And that's when I saw it again, not the figure this time, but the light. It was moving through the trees again, but closer now, much closer. I held my breath as it approached the car. Through the side window, I could see the glow getting brighter, casting strange shadows that seemed to move independently of the light source. The singing had stopped again, replaced by a sound I can only describe as whispering. Dozens of voices all talking at once in that same ancient language. The light stopped right outside Jake's window. I could see it clearly now, not a lantern at all, but something that pulsed and shifted like a living thing. And in its glow, I caught a glimpse of what was carrying it. I won't describe what I saw. I can't. My brain still refuses to process it fully. All I can say is that it wasn't human, and it wasn't natural, and when it turned those things that might have been eyes toward the car window, I nearly screamed. Instead, I squeezed my eyes shut and didn't open them again until dawn. When the first gray light started filtering through the trees, everything went quiet. The singing stopped, the whispering faded, and the oppressive feeling that had been pressing down on us all night finally lifted. Jake woke up as I was starting the engine. "Where are we going?" he mumbled. "Home," I said. "Right now." We packed in record time and got the hell out of there. Jake kept asking what had happened after he fell asleep, but I couldn't bring myself to tell him. Still can't, really. We drove straight back to Charlotte without stopping, and we've never talked about that night since. Jake sold the Outback a month later and bought a motorcycle instead. Said he was done with camping. I've done some research since then, trying to find some rational explanation for what we experienced. The closest I've come is an old Cherokee legend about spirits that guard certain places in the mountains, beings that don't take kindly to trespassers. But the Cherokee were driven out of that area more than a century ago. Whatever we encountered that night, it's still up there, still circling that clearing, still singing in the darkness. And if you're thinking about car camping in the deep Appalachian woods, my advice is simple: find somewhere else to go. My name's Jenny, and I've been living in these West Virginia hills all my 32 years. Born in a holler so deep you gotta climb just to see sky. Most folks round here, they stick close to home, but me and my girlfriend Cassie, we like to explore. get in my old Ford pickup, and see what's over the next ridge. That's how we found ourselves in trouble that weekend in March. See, Cassie's from Charleston originally, moved up here for work at the mine office. She had this idea about dispersed camping, sleeping in the truck bed under the stars like some kinda romantic adventure. I told her March nights still get cold as a witch's tit, but she had her heart set on it. We drove up into the Monongahela, past all the places I knew, into country that even my granddaddy used to call the far places. Took old logging roads that ain't seen a saw crew in 20 years, winding up through hollers that don't got names on any map. Found this spot about 2 hours from anywhere, a little flat place beside a creek, surrounded by hemlocks so tall they blocked out half the sky. Creek was running high from snowmelt, singing over the rocks like it was happy to see us. Perfect place to set up camp, or so we thought. Cassie was all excited, spreading out sleeping bags in the truck bed, hanging a lantern from the tailgate. I gathered up some deadfall for a fire while she unpacked the cooler. Ham sandwiches and beer, nothing fancy, but it tasted good in the mountain air. "This is perfect," she said, snuggling up next to me as the sun dropped behind the ridgeline. "Just us and nature." I didn't have the heart to tell her we weren't alone. See, I'd noticed things while gathering wood, boot prints in the mud by the creek, but old ones, worn soft by rain, a path leading off into the trees that looked like it got used regular. And something else, carved marks on some of the hemlocks. Not initials or hearts like kids do. These were symbols I didn't recognize, cut deep into the bark. But Cassie was so happy, I kept my mouth shut. Fire burned good and bright, pushing back the darkness that comes early in them deep hollers. We sat drinking beer and talking about maybe buying some land up here, building a little cabin. Cassie had these dreams, you know? She wanted to live simple, away from all the noise and rush. That's when we heard the first sound. Started as a tapping, real rhythmic-like. Tap, 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 pause. Tap, 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 coming from somewhere across the creek. I thought maybe a woodpecker, but wrong time of day for that. "What is that?" Cassie asked. "Just the woods," I said. "Trees make all kinds of noise." But I was listening hard now, and that tapping didn't sound natural. Too regular, too deliberate, like someone sending a message. Then it stopped, and we heard voices. Not clear enough to make out words, but definitely people talking somewhere in the trees. Soft voices, like they didn't want to be overheard. Multiple people, having some kind of conversation. Cassie grabbed my arm. "Should we call out? Let them know we're here?" Something in my gut said no. Don't know why, but every instinct I had was screaming to stay quiet. "Stay small, don't draw attention. Probably just other campers," I whispered. "Best to leave them be." The voices continued for maybe 10 minutes, then faded away. We tried to relax, but that easy feeling was gone. Every little sound made us jump, an owl hooting, a branch creaking in the wind, the splash of a beaver somewhere downstream. We banked the fire early and crawled into the sleeping bags. Truck bed ain't the most comfortable place to sleep, but we were tired enough that it didn't matter much. Cassie curled up against me, her hair smelling like wood smoke and shampoo. I was almost asleep when I felt the truck move. Just a little shift, like someone had bumped into it. Could have been the wind, but there wasn't any wind that night. Air was still as death. Then it happened again. A definite push against the side of the truck, like someone testing to see if we were awake. I lay there real still, trying to control my breathing. Cassie was dead asleep, exhausted from the hike and the mountain air. I didn't want to wake her, didn't want to scare her, but my heart was hammering so loud I was sure whoever was out there could hear it. The truck rocked a third time, harder. Then I heard footsteps. Not regular footsteps. These were wrong somehow. Too light, like whoever was walking didn't weigh much. And the rhythm was off, sometimes fast little steps, sometimes long pauses, like they were stopping to listen or look at something. The steps circled the truck. I could track them by sound, around the front, down the passenger side, behind the tailgate where our heads were. I squeezed my eyes shut and tried to blend into the darkness. That's when the whispering started. Right outside the truck bed, maybe 2 feet from where we lay. Multiple voices, all talking at once in words I couldn't understand. Wasn't English, wasn't anything I'd ever heard. The voices were wrong too high, too breathy, like children trying to sound like adults. One of them giggled. It was the kind of laugh that makes your skin crawl, full of nasty secrets and cruel intentions. Then they all started giggling. This chorus of twisted childlike laughter that went on until I wanted to scream just to make it stop. Cassie stirred beside me, mumbling something in her sleep. The laughter cut off instantly, like someone had thrown a switch. Dead silence. I lay there for what felt like hours, every muscle tight as a wire, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. Just that oppressive quiet that feels like the whole world holding its breath. When I finally dozed off, I had dreams. Dark dreams about pale figures moving through the trees, about symbols carved in flesh instead of bark, about voices calling my name from the bottom of deep, dark water. I woke to Cassie shaking me, sunlight filtering down through the hemlocks. "Jenny, wake up. Something's wrong." I sat up, groggy and disoriented. "What's wrong?" She pointed to the creek. "Look." Our cooler was sitting in the middle of the creek, lid open, contents scattered downstream. The fire ring we'd built was destroyed, stones scattered, ashes spread around like someone had kicked through them, and on the ground all around the truck were footprints. Dozens of them, small bare feet, like children, but the toes were too long, and the prints pressed too deep, like whatever made them was heavier than it should be. They circled the truck over and over, sometimes overlapping, sometimes veering off into the woods only to come back again. "Animals?" Cassie asked, hopefully. I shook my head. These weren't animal tracks. We packed up fast, not talking much. Cassie kept looking over her shoulder while I loaded the gear, and I couldn't blame her. Even in daylight, them woods felt wrong. Too quiet, too watching. As we drove out, I caught movement in the rearview mirror. Just a glimpse of pale shapes flitting between the trees, there and gone too quick to focus on. But I knew they were watching us leave, probably laughing that nasty laugh. We made it back to civilization without talking about what happened. Cassie never mentioned camping again, and I was glad. Some places in these mountains ain't meant for outsiders, and whatever's living in that particular holler made that real clear. I asked my granddaddy about it later, described the area as best I could. His face went gray when I told him about the symbols on the trees. "Hollow folk," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Thought they was all gone." "What are hollow folk?" "People who went into the deep places and never came back out. Least, not the same as they went in. They change, Jenny. Become something else. Something that ain't quite human anymore." He wouldn't say more, just warned me to stay away from the far places. Some warnings you listen to. I never went back to that holler, but sometimes on quiet nights when the wind's just right, I swear I can hear that laughter echoing across the ridges. And I know they're still out there, waiting for the next folks foolish enough to sleep in their territory. The mountains got long memories, and whatever's living in them deep hollers remembers every slight, every trespass. Best to leave them be, and stick to the places where normal folks belong. The summer I turned 22, I convinced my girlfriend Emma to come with me on a car camping trip through Tennessee. We'd been together since junior year at UT, and she was from Nashville, total city girl who thought roughing it meant staying at a Hampton Inn without room service. But I'd grown up spending summers with my great uncle in the Smoky Mountains, and I wanted to show her that side of my life. We packed her little Nissan Sentra with camping gear and headed up into the Cumberland Gap area, planning to hit some dispersed camping spots I remembered from when I was a kid. The idea was to spend 4 days exploring old family haunts, swimming in swimming holes I used to fish, maybe even finding the ruins of the cabin where my great-great-grandfather had lived before the Park Service bought out the mountain families. Emma was a good sport about it, even when we got stuck behind a coal truck for 20 miles on winding mountain roads. She'd brought her camera and was taking pictures of everything: old barns, abandoned homesteads, the way the mist hung in the valleys at dawn. "Your family lived up here?" she asked, as we drove deeper into the mountains. "For generations," I told her. "My great-uncle Joe used to say we were here before Tennessee was even a state. Mountain people, through and through." That should have been my first warning. We found our campsite late afternoon on the second day, 12, a beautiful meadow beside a creek, surrounded by old-growth forest. It was accessible by this barely there Forest Service road that I remembered from childhood visits. Perfect spot for car camping, level ground, natural windbreak, and far enough from any main roads that we'd have total privacy. Emma loved it immediately. She was setting up our tent while I gathered firewood, humming some Taylor Swift song and talking about how we should buy land up here someday, build a little vacation cabin. "This is gorgeous, Tyler," she called out. "I can't believe your family gave this up." "They didn't have much choice," I said. "Government bought them out in the 1940s to create the national forest. Lot of families got displaced. That's when I noticed the foundation stones. They were scattered around the meadow, mostly hidden by grass and wildflowers. But once you knew what to look for, you could see the outline of where a cabin had stood. Maybe more than one cabin. There were several rectangles of stacked stones, like a little settlement had been here once. "Emma, come look at this." She came over, camera in hand, and started taking pictures of the ruins. "Think this was your family's place?" "Could be. Uncle Joe always said there were Hendersons scattered all over these mountains." We spent the rest of the afternoon exploring, finding more evidence of the old homestead. A rusted well pump, the remains of a split-rail fence, even what looked like a small family cemetery with graves marked by fieldstones instead of proper headstones. As evening approached, we made a fire in one of the old stone foundations and cooked dinner. Emma was in full-on romantic mode, snuggling up next to me as the stars came out, talking about how connected she felt to my family history. "It's like we're communing with your ancestors," she said, probably half joking. That's when we heard the first truck. It was still far off, engine grinding up the mountain road we'd taken to get here. Emma and I looked at each other, both thinking the same thing. We hadn't seen another soul all day, and this road didn't really go anywhere except this meadow. "Probably just someone turning around," I said, but my stomach was already knotting up. The truck got closer. Headlights swept through the trees as it navigated the switchbacks, and we could hear it was more than one vehicle now. A convoy of some kind, engines laboring under heavy loads. "Should we put out the fire?" Emma whispered. Too late. The first truck broke into the clearing, headlights hitting us like spotlights. It was a big pickup, jacked up on oversized tires, with a Confederate flag decal across the back window. Behind it came two more trucks and an ATV, all of them parking in a semicircle around our campsite. Doors slammed. Boots hit gravel. In the glare of the headlights, I counted 6 men, all of them with that lean, hard look you see in families that have lived too close together for too many generations. They were dressed in hunting clothes and work boots, and every one of them was armed. The oldest one, a man maybe in his 50s with gray stubble and dead eyes, walked toward our fire. The others spread out behind him like they'd done this before. "Well, well," he said, voice carrying that particular mountain accent that can sound friendly or threatening depending on the context. This was definitely threatening. "What we got here?" "Just camping," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We can leave if this is private property." "Oh, it's private all right," the man said. He was close enough now that I could see the family resemblance, the sharp cheekbones, the pale eyes. Been in the Henderson family for 6 generations. My blood turned to ice water. "Henderson?" Emma said. "Tyler, your last name is Henderson." The old man's dead eyes fixed on me. "That right, boy? You a Henderson?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Well, I'll be damned." He turned to the others. "Boys, we got ourselves a family reunion." The way he said it made every hair on my body stand up. "What's your daddy's name, boy?" "Michael," I managed. "Michael Henderson." "Michael," the old man scratched his stubble. "That'd be little Mikey, Joe's nephew. Moved to town, went to college, got himself all citified." He spat in the fire, making it hiss. "We heard about Mikey, heard he went and married some outsider woman, had a boy who was too good for mountain folk. That you, boy?" "Look," I said, standing up slowly. "We don't want any trouble. We're just camping. We'll pack up and leave." "Nah," the old man said. "Don't think so. See, this here's family land, and family land got family obligations." 2 of the younger men moved closer to Emma, who was sitting frozen by the fire. She looked terrified, clutching her camera like it might protect her. "You brought an outsider to family land," the old man continued. "That's disrespectful. That's the kind of thing that needs to be addressed. She's my girlfriend. She's with me. She ain't family." His voice was flat, matter of fact, and non-family don't belong on family land. One of the younger men, maybe my age but with that inbred look that comes from too small a gene pool, grabbed Emma's arm and hauled her to her feet. She cried out, and I started toward her. "Tyler, don't," she said quickly. "Just do what they want." The old man smiled, and it was the ugliest thing I'd ever seen. "Smart girl. Too bad she ain't family." "What do you want?" I asked. "Well now, that depends. You willing to do your family duty?" "What does that mean?" He gestured toward Emma. "Means proving where your loyalties lie, family or outsiders." I understood what he was asking, and my stomach turned over. "No, absolutely not." "No?" The old man's eyebrows went up. "Boy, you sure you want to say no to family?" "Tyler," Emma whispered. "Just tell them what they want to hear, please." But I could see it in their eyes. They weren't going to let either of us walk away from this. Whatever twisted family tradition or mountain justice they thought they were upholding, it ended with Emma dead and me either joining them or disappearing alongside her. "Tell you what," the old man said. "We'll give you some time to think about it. Boys, put them in the truck." They zip-tied our hands and shoved us into the bed of one of the pickups. Emma was crying quietly, and I was trying to think of some way out of this nightmare. But we were outnumbered, outgunned, and miles from help. They drove us deeper into the mountains, following logging roads that probably hadn't seen official traffic in decades. Eventually, we stopped at what looked like an old mining camp, a collection of rusted trailers and prefab buildings scattered around a clearing. "Family compound," the old man explained as they hauled us out of the truck. "Been here since the coal company pulled out in the 80s, nice and private." They locked us in what used to be a mining office, a concrete block building with barred windows. Emma collapsed on the floor, sobbing, and I sat beside her trying to figure out how to get us out of this. "Tyler, what do they want?" she whispered. I couldn't tell her, couldn't explain that in some twisted mountain family logic, I was being asked to prove my loyalty by letting them kill her, or worse. We spent 3 days in that building. They brought us food and water, but no explanation of what they were planning. I could hear them outside sometimes, arguing among themselves, engines coming and going at all hours. On the third night, the youngest one, couldn't have been more than 16, brought us dinner and left the door unlocked. "Accident," he said quietly. "Check your car keys." He'd slipped them into the plate of beans. We waited until after midnight, then slipped out of the building. The compound was quiet, most of the lights out. Our car was parked behind one of the trailers, exactly where the kid had said it would be. We made it maybe 5 miles before we heard the trucks coming after us. The chase down those mountain roads was the most terrifying experience of my life. Emma driving while I watched the headlights getting closer in the mirrors, both of us knowing that if they caught us, we were dead. But Emma grew up in Nashville traffic, and she could drive. She took those hairpin turns at speeds that had me praying to every god I could think of, and somehow we stayed ahead of them long enough to reach the main highway. We drove straight to the nearest state police barracks and told them everything. But when they went up to investigate, they found the compound abandoned. No sign anyone had ever been there. "Happens sometimes with these mountain clans," the detective explained. "They're mobile, and they look out for each other. Someone probably warned them you'd gotten away. We never found out what happened to that kid who helped us escape. I hope he got out too, but I doubt it. Mountain families don't forgive betrayal, even from their own blood." Emma and I broke up a month later. She said she couldn't handle being with someone whose family included people like that. I didn't blame her. I've never been back to those mountains. Never will. Some family reunions aren't worth attending. This happened 3 years ago, but I still check my locks twice every night. My therapist says writing it down might help, so here goes. I'm a travel blogger, was a travel blogger, and I'd been documenting hidden gems across America for my website. The algorithm loved off-the-beaten-path content, and Appalachia was a goldmine for that kind of thing. Abandoned towns, forgotten mining camps, scenic overlooks that didn't make it into guidebooks. I was driving through eastern Kentucky in my Honda CR-V, loaded with camera gear and camping supplies. The plan was to spend a week hitting remote locations, sleeping in the car to save money on hotels. I'd done it dozens of times before in Colorado, Utah, Oregon, never had any problems. The spot I was looking for was supposed to be near Hazard, an old strip mine that had been reclaimed into this beautiful meadow surrounded by forest, perfect for sunrise photography. But my GPS kept losing signal, and the hand-drawn directions I'd gotten from a guy at a gas station weren't making much sense. I'd been driving for 2 hours on increasingly narrow roads when I realized I was completely lost. The sun was setting, my phone showed no service, and I hadn't seen another car in over an hour. These weren't scenic mountain roads. They were potholed, winding things that seemed to lead deeper into nowhere with every turn. That's when I saw the sign, Crow's Nest Hollow, private road. Below it, in smaller letters, trespassers will be shot. I should have turned around right there, but the road looked recently graded, and I was getting desperate. Plus, I figured if it was a private road, it had to lead somewhere, maybe to a house where I could ask for directions. The road climbed steadily through thick forest, winding around switchbacks that made my ears pop. After about 10 minutes, I came to a cluster of buildings, 3 or 4 trailers and a few shacks, scattered around a clearing. No lights on anywhere, but there were vehicles parked outside, mostly trucks and ATVs, all of them beat to hell. I pulled up to what looked like the main trailer and honked gently. Waited a minute, then got out and knocked on the door. "Hello? Sorry to bother you, but I'm lost and wondering if you could point me toward the main road." No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. That's when I noticed the smell, sweet and chemical, like nail polish remover mixed with something rotten. It was coming from a shed behind the trailers, and there were industrial fans running inside, the kind you see at construction sites. My journalism instincts kicked in. This was either a meth lab or something worse. I needed to get out of there immediately. I was backing toward my car when I heard the dogs. Not barking, growling, low, mean sounds that made every hair on my body stand up. I turned around slowly and saw them emerging from the tree line. 3 pit bulls, all muscle and scar tissue, moving toward me in a loose semicircle. "Easy boys," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I'm just leaving." That's when I heard the voice behind me. "You ain't going nowhere." I turned. A man had come out of one of the shacks, tall, thin, wearing stained coveralls and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He had a rifle in his hands, not quite pointed at me but ready. "Like I said, I'm just lost. Looking for directions. I'll leave right now. No problem." "Nah," he said, walking closer. "Don't think so. You've seen too much already." 2 more men emerged from the other buildings, all armed, all looking at me like I was dinner. The dogs were still growling, waiting for a command. "Look, I don't know what you think I saw, but I didn't see anything. I'm just a travel blogger. I take pictures of mountains and stuff." The first man laughed. "Travel blogger? That's rich. You writing about us now?" "No, I swear, I just want to leave." "Billy," one of the other men called out. "Trucks coming up the road." Sure enough, I could hear an engine grinding up the hill. The man with the rifle, Billy, cursed under his breath. "Get her in the shed," he told the others. "Quick." That broke my paralysis. I bolted for my car, keys already in my hand. Made it maybe 10 steps before one of the dogs hit me from behind, knocking me face first into the gravel. The wind got knocked out of me, and before I could recover, rough hands were hauling me to my feet. "Stupid bitch," someone muttered, zip-tying my hands behind my back. They dragged me toward the shed with the fans. The smell got stronger as we approached, definitely chemicals, but also something organic and wrong. One of them kicked open the door, and I saw what was inside. Tables covered with glass equipment, like a chemistry lab from hell, buckets of what looked like battery acid, and in the back corner, a blue plastic tarp covering something human-shaped. "Jesus Christ, what is this place?" I whispered. "Shut up," Billy said, shoving me down onto a folding chair. "You just sit quiet while we figure out what to do with you." The truck that had been coming up the road pulled into the clearing. I could hear voices outside, but couldn't make out words. Billy and the others were arguing in low voices about something. I caught fragments. "Cops, too risky. Bury her with the other one." That's when I knew I was going to die in that shed. But here's the thing about zip ties. If you're wearing a watch with a metal band, you can sometimes work them loose. Takes time and patience, and it cuts up your wrists pretty bad. But it's possible. I'd learned that from a true crime podcast, of all things. It took me maybe 20 minutes of careful sawing, trying not to make any noise. The whole time, I could hear them outside discussing my fate like I was livestock. The plastic tarp in the corner seemed to be watching me. When the ties finally snapped, I nearly cried with relief. But now I had to get out of there without anyone noticing. The shed had a back window, but it was small and high up. I climbed onto one of the tables, trying not to disturb the equipment, and pushed the window open as quietly as I could. It opened just wide enough for me to squeeze through. I dropped into the weeds behind the shed and lay still for a moment, listening. The voices were still coming from the front of the compound. Sounded like they were having some kind of meeting with whoever had arrived in the truck. My car keys were still in my pocket, but my CRV was parked right in front of the main trailer. No way to get to it without being seen. I'd have to go on foot. The forest behind the compound was thick with undergrowth, but I pushed through as quietly as I could. Every snapped twig sounded like a gunshot to me. I kept expecting to hear shouts behind me, or worse, the sound of those dogs being released. I must have hiked for 2 hours through the darkest woods I'd ever seen. No moon, no stars visible through the canopy. Just me stumbling through briars and deadfall, guided by nothing but the slope of the land. I knew if I kept going downhill, I'd eventually hit a creek, and creeks led to roads. When I finally saw headlights through the trees, I almost sobbed with relief. It was a county road, narrow but paved. I flagged down the first car I saw, an old pickup driven by a woman in scrubs who was heading home from her nursing shift. She took one look at my torn clothes and bloody wrists and drove me straight to the state police barracks in Hazard. I told them everything, the location, the shed, the smell, the covered body. They said they'd look into it. But when they went up there 2 days later, the place was empty. Buildings cleared out, vehicles gone. Even the shed had been stripped clean, like no one had ever lived there at all. The detective assigned to my case said it wasn't unusual. These mountain operations, they move around a lot, set up for a few months, then disappear when they think someone's onto them. What about the body under the tarp? He just shrugged. No evidence of that. Could have been anything. I know what I saw, and I know how close I came to ending up under my own tarp. I stopped doing travel blogging after that. Couldn't handle being alone in remote places anymore. Every shadow looked like a person with a rifle. Every engine sound made me think of trucks full of men coming to finish what they started. They never found Billy or the others. For all I know, they're set up somewhere else now, cooking their poison and disposing of anyone unlucky enough to stumble across them. The mountains keep their secrets, and sometimes those secrets have teeth. I still have nightmares about that shed, about the smell, about the casual way they discussed killing me. But mostly I dream about the tarp in the corner and wonder who was under it. Someone's daughter, maybe. Someone's mother. Someone who took a wrong turn and never made it home. Dude, I still can't sleep properly after what happened last month. Writing this on my phone at 3 a.m. because every time I close my eyes I hear them again. The voices. So, me and my buddy Alex decided to do this epic road trip through Virginia, sleeping in my Jeep Cherokee to save money. We're both broke college students, but we had spring break and wanted to do something memorable. Alex found this app that shows dispersed camping spots, and we picked this place in George Washington National Forest that looked sick in the photos. The drive up was insane. These winding mountain roads through forests so thick you couldn't see the sky. Took us like 4 hours to find the actual spot because the GPS kept losing signal, and we had to navigate using this printed map Alex downloaded. When we finally found it, it was perfect. This clearing on top of a ridge with views for miles, completely isolated. We could see other mountain ranges rolling away into the distance like waves. The spot had an old fire ring and a picnic table someone had built years ago, all weathered and covered in carved initials. We set up camp in the back of my Jeep, had the whole thing rigged with sleeping bags and a little camp stove. Alex brought his shortwave radio because he's obsessed with trying to pick up weird transmissions from around the world, always talking about numbers, stations, and mysterious broadcasts and shit like that. First night was awesome. We made dinner, drank some beers, sat around the fire talking about girls and classes and what we wanted to do after graduation. Alex was scanning through frequencies on his radio, picking up random stuff, some country music station, a talk show in Spanish, static mostly. Around midnight, he found something weird. This really clear signal that wasn't music or talking, just this low humming sound with occasional clicks and beeps, almost like Morse code, but not quite. That's strange, Alex said, adjusting the antenna. Signal strength is off the charts, but I can't find any station info. We listened for maybe 20 minutes. The pattern kept repeating, 30 seconds of humming, then rapid clicks, then silence, then it would start over. Alex was trying to record it on his phone when the transmission suddenly changed. A voice came through, crystal clear, like the person was sitting right next to us. Can anyone hear me? Please, if someone's out there, I need help. Alex and I looked at each other. The voice sounded desperate, terrified even. We're at the old mining station on Copper Ridge. There's something wrong here, something in the tunnels. It took Marcus 2 hours ago, and now it's coming for the rest of us. Alex grabbed the radio microphone. Hello? This is Alex. We can hear you. What's your location? Static. Then the humming pattern started again. Probably just someone messing around, I said, but my skin was crawling, like a radio drama or something. But Alex was already pulling out his phone, trying to get a signal to call for help. No bars, of course. We were way too deep in the mountains. The transmission continued for another hour. Different voices now, all panicked, all talking about being trapped in some kind of mining facility. They mentioned creatures in the tunnels, people disappearing, equipment failing. It was like listening to a horror movie, except it felt real. The fear in their voices was genuine. Around 2 a.m., we heard gunshots through the radio. Not sound effects. Actual gunfire, echoing through whatever space these people were in, then screaming. Then the transmission cut to static. "Dude, we need to do something," Alex said. "What if that was real?" "Real how? There's no mining operations around here. This whole area is national forest." But I was wrong about that. Alex spent the next morning researching on his phone whenever we could get a signal down the mountain. Turns out there were copper mines all through these hills, back in the 1800s. Most of them were abandoned and sealed up decades ago, but some of the entrances were still accessible. We found one that afternoon, maybe 2 miles from our campsite. Just a dark hole in the hillside, partially blocked by fallen rocks but still big enough to crawl through. There was a rusty sign nearby warning about dangerous gases and unstable tunnels. "We're not going in there," I told Alex. "I'm not saying we should, but what if those people are real? What if they're trapped down there?" That night, the transmissions came back. Same voices, but weaker now. They were talking about the air getting thin, about something moving in the deeper tunnels that they couldn't see clearly. One voice, a woman, kept saying over and over that they should never have come here. "The equipment detected the signal 3 days ago," she said through heavy static. "Some kind of electromagnetic anomaly deep in the mine shaft. We thought it might be a natural phenomenon, maybe rare minerals. But when we got down here, we found, God, I don't even know how to describe it." Alex was recording everything now, filling up his phone's memory with hours of these transmissions. The voices described something that lived in the deepest parts of the mine, something that had been there since long before the miners came, something that fed on electromagnetic energy and had been dormant until their equipment woke it up. On the third night, we heard the last transmission. "It's in the main chamber now. Sarah's gone. Tom's gone. I'm the only one left, and the tunnel behind me just collapsed. If anyone receives this, don't come looking for us. Don't come to Copper Ridge. Seal the mine. Blow it up if you have to. Don't let it get out." Then silence. Nothing but static for the rest of the night. Alex wanted to hike back to the mine entrance the next morning, but when we got there, it was different. The opening we'd found before was completely blocked by a fresh rock slide. Not old rocks that had been there for years. New debris, still dusty, like something had collapsed from the inside. "Maybe they got out," Alex said hopefully. "Maybe they triggered the collapse to escape." But I knew better. Standing there looking at that sealed entrance, I could feel something wrong underneath us, like the ground itself was holding its breath. We packed up and left that day, cutting our trip short. Alex kept trying to pick up those transmissions on the drive home, but we never heard them again. Dead static on every frequency. When we got back to campus, Alex researched everything he could about Copper Ridge Mine, found newspaper articles from the 1890s about miners who disappeared down there, about strange lights seen in the tunnels, about equipment that failed for no reason. The mine was officially closed in 1902 after a cave-in that killed 12 men. But here's the thing that really messes with my head. Alex found death certificates for those 12 miners. Their names matched the voices we heard on the radio. Marcus, Sarah, Tom. All of them died over a century ago. Alex thinks we somehow picked up an echo, like their voices got trapped in the electromagnetic field down there and our radio tuned into it. Some kind of time loop or residual haunting. I think something else. I think those people, whatever they were warning us about something that's still down there. Something that's been waiting in the dark for over 100 years. Either way, I'm never going car camping in the mountains again, and I threw out my radio the day we got back. Some frequencies aren't meant to be found. I'm a freelance photographer, specializing in abandoned places and urban decay. Instagram account with like 50K followers. You know the type. I make decent money selling prints to people who love that whole forgotten America aesthetic. But I've never posted about what happened in the mountains of southeastern Kentucky last summer. Some things are too dark, even for my audience. I was working on a series about abandoned coal mining towns when I heard about this place called Millbrook, supposedly a whole company town that got evacuated in the 1970s after some kind of environmental disaster. The few people I could find who'd even heard of it described it as a ghost town frozen in time, complete with houses still furnished, cars still parked in driveways, perfect for my work. The problem was finding it. Millbrook didn't appear on any modern maps, and the old mining company records were sealed. I spent weeks tracking down former miners and their families, trying to piece together directions. Finally, An old-timer named Earl who'd worked the mines until they closed gave me hand-drawn directions to what he called the back way in. "Don't go poking around there," he warned me. "That place ain't right. Never was, even before the evacuation." But that just made me more interested. I loaded my Subaru Forester with camera gear and camping supplies and headed into the mountains on a cloudy Thursday morning. Earl's directions led me off Highway 27 onto a series of increasingly narrow roads that eventually turned into dirt tracks winding through dense forest. After 3 hours of driving, I found what looked like an old mining road, 2 tire ruts separated by weeds, barely wide enough for my car. A rusted sign nailed to a tree said, "Millbrook Mining Co., authorized personnel only," but it was so faded and bullet-riddled, it was barely legible. The road climbed steadily through thick woods for another hour before emerging into a valley I couldn't believe existed. Spread out below me was indeed a complete town, maybe 40 or 50 houses, a main street with storefronts, even what looked like a school and a church. And Earl was right, it looked frozen in time. Cars from the 1960s and 70s sat in driveways. Laundry still hung on clotheslines. Picket fences stood intact around small yards. It was a photographer's dream. I drove down into the town and parked on Main Street in front of what used to be a general store. The silence was complete. No birds, no insects, not even wind. Just dead, heavy air that seemed to absorb sound. I spent the afternoon shooting exterior shots, working my way through the residential streets. The preservation was incredible. Toys scattered in yards, bicycles leaning against porches, garden hoses coiled neatly beside front steps. It was like everyone had just vanished one day, leaving everything exactly as it was. But there were disturbing details too. Scratches on many of the doors, deep gouges in the wood like something with claws had been trying to get in, windows that had been boarded up from the inside, with furniture piled against them. And in several yards, I found what looked like graves, rough mounds of earth marked with handmade wooden crosses. As evening approached, I decided to camp on the outskirts of town rather than inside it. Something about all those empty houses watching me was getting under my skin. I found a flat spot near the tree line and set up my sleeping area in the back of the Forester. I was cooking dinner on my camp stove when I saw the first light, just a brief flicker in one of the houses, like someone had lit a candle and then blown it out. I watched for a few minutes but saw nothing else. Probably just my imagination, or maybe a reflection from my own camp. But then, it happened again. Different house this time, second floor window. A warm yellow glow that lasted maybe 10 seconds before going dark. Then another light, and another. Within an hour, I counted lights in at least a dozen different houses. Not electric lights. These were the soft, flickering glow of candles or oil lamps. And they seemed to be moving around inside the houses, like people carrying them from room to room. I grabbed my camera and telephoto lens, trying to get shots of the phenomena. Through the viewfinder, I could see the lights more clearly, definitely moving, definitely inside the houses, but I couldn't make out any figures carrying them. Around midnight, the lights went out one by one until the town was dark again. I barely slept. Every little sound made me jump, branches creaking, small animals scurrying through the underbrush, the tick of my car engine cooling down. And twice during the night I swore I heard voices carrying across the valley. Distant conversation, too far away to make out words, but definitely human voices. Morning brought fog so thick I could barely see my own hands. It rolled through the valley like a living thing, turning the abandoned town into a landscape of vague shapes and shadows. Perfect for atmospheric photography, but it made me nervous. I couldn't see what was around me. I waited until the fog lifted before venturing back into town. In daylight, Millbrook looked exactly as abandoned as it had the day before. No signs of recent habitation, no evidence that anyone had been in those houses lighting candles. I decided to investigate one of the houses where I'd seen lights. A small ranch-style home on Maple Street with a red door and a rusty swing set in the backyard. The front door was unlocked, they all were apparently. Inside was like stepping into a museum. Everything preserved exactly as it had been left decades ago. Furniture covered in dust but otherwise intact. A kitchen table set for dinner, plates, and silverware still in place. A television from the 1970s sitting in the living room, rabbit ears antenna positioned to receive signals that no longer existed. But there were candles, dozens of them, scattered throughout the house. Some were old, covered in dust like everything else, but others looked fresh. New wax, clean wicks, as if they'd been recently lit. On the kitchen counter, I found a calendar turned to July 1977, presumably the month the town was evacuated. Someone had circled a date in red ink, July 23rd. Written next to it in faded handwriting were the words, "They came back." I was photographing the calendar when I heard the front door slam shut. My heart hammered as I walked back to the living room. The door was indeed closed, though I was certain I'd left it open. I tried the handle, locked. From the inside, somehow, though I hadn't heard the sound of a deadbolt or chain, I tried the back door, also locked. Windows too, all of them sealed shut as if they'd been painted over years ago. That's when I heard the footsteps upstairs. Slow, deliberate steps across the floor above me, moving from room to room. I grabbed my camera bag and looked for another way out, but every exit was sealed. The footsteps continued, sometimes directly overhead, sometimes in other parts of the house. Then I heard a voice, not calling out to me, just talking. A woman's voice, conversational, like she was chatting with someone in another room. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was friendly, domestic, like someone going about their daily routine. More voices joined in. A man's voice, children's voices, all having what sounded like a normal family conversation somewhere upstairs in a house that was supposed to be empty. I found a window in the basement that wasn't sealed and managed to break it with a wrench from my toolkit. Cut my hands pretty bad squeezing through, but I was too scared to care about blood. I crawled out into the backyard and ran back to my car without looking back. The forester started on the first try, thank God. I drove out of that valley faster than was safe on those narrow mountain roads, not slowing down until I reached the highway. I've researched Millbrook extensively since then, trying to find out what really happened there in 1977. The official story is environmental contamination from the mine, chemical leaks that made the town uninhabitable. But I found newspaper clippings from that summer describing something else entirely. Disappearances, families vanishing from their homes with no explanation, search parties finding no trace of missing people, reports of lights in empty houses and voices from deserted buildings. The evacuation wasn't ordered by environmental authorities. It was organized by the residents themselves, who fled in terror from something they couldn't explain. The last newspaper report I found was dated July 24th, 1977, one day after the date circled on that kitchen calendar. The headline read, "Millbrook residents report mass return of missing families, town to be permanently abandoned." I never developed those photos I took in the houses. Every time I think about it, I remember the sound of that family having dinner upstairs in an empty house, and I decide I'd rather not know what my camera might have captured. Some places are abandoned for good reasons, and sometimes the people who left never really leave. My wife Patricia and I have been car camping for 15 years. We started when our kids were little as a cheap way to take family vacations, and kept it up after they moved out because we'd fallen in love with the simplicity of it. Just us, our reliable old Ford Explorer, and whatever wilderness we could find. Patricia is the planner in our relationship. She researches every trip meticulously, studies topographic maps, reads reviews on camping forums. I'm more of a wing it and see what happens type, but I've learned to appreciate her thoroughness over the years. It's kept us out of trouble more times than I can count. This particular trip was supposed to be our 20th wedding anniversary celebration. Patricia had found this remote spot in the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia, accessible only by an old logging road that didn't appear on most GPS systems. The photos on the camping website showed a beautiful meadow surrounded by old-growth forest, with a stream running through it. "It's called Miller's Hollow," Patricia said, showing me the printouts she'd made. "The reviews say it's like stepping back in time, completely undeveloped, no other campers, just pure wilderness." We drove up on a Friday afternoon in late September. The fall colors were spectacular, maples blazing red and orange, hickories golden in the afternoon light. The logging road was rougher than we'd expected, full of potholes and washouts that had our Explorer creaking and groaning, but we made it to the meadow just as the sun was setting. Patricia was right, it was like stepping back in time. The meadow was maybe an acre of open grass surrounded by forests so thick and old it felt primeval. The stream was crystal clear, running over smooth stones worn by centuries of water flow. We could hear no sounds of civilization, just the whisper of wind in the trees and the gentle murmur of moving water. We set up our camp near the stream, a simple arrangement, with our sleeping area in the back of the Explorer and a small camp kitchen on a folding table. Patricia had packed her anniversary dinner, steaks, a bottle of wine we'd been saving, even a battery-powered speaker for some quiet music. "This is perfect," she said, taking my hand as we watched the stars emerge overhead. "I can't believe we have this whole place to ourselves." That's when I noticed the smell. It was faint at first, barely detectable under the clean mountain air, sweet and organic, like flowers beginning to rot. I mentioned it to Patricia, but she couldn't smell anything unusual. "Probably just decomposing leaves," she said. "It is fall after all." But the smell got stronger as the night went on. By the time we finished dinner, it was definitely noticeable, that cloying sweetness that makes your stomach turn, like something had died and was slowly putrefying in the warm evening air. "There," Patricia said suddenly. "I smell it now." "What is that?" We followed our noses to the edge of the meadow, where the ground dropped away into a steep ravine we hadn't noticed in the fading light. The smell was definitely coming from down there, thick and nauseating. "Dead deer, maybe?" I suggested. "Or a bear that wandered down there and couldn't get back out." "Should we check it out?" "Not in the dark. We'll take a look in the morning." But the smell kept us awake most of the night. It seemed to get stronger as the air cooled, seeping through the cracked windows of the Explorer despite our attempts to seal them. Patricia finally took some Dramamine to settle her stomach, and I wasn't far behind. Dawn brought some relief as a morning breeze dispersed the worst of the odor. After a quick breakfast, we gathered our flashlights and headed to the edge of the ravine to investigate. The ravine was deeper than I'd expected, maybe 30 feet straight down, with steep sides covered in thick undergrowth. At the bottom, I could see what looked like a pile of debris caught against some fallen logs. "I'm going down there," I told Patricia. "Be careful. Take your phone and call if you need help pulling you out." The climb down wasn't too difficult, plenty of roots and rocks to use as handholds. But the smell got exponentially worse as I descended. By the time I reached the bottom, I was breathing through my mouth and fighting not to gag. The debris pile was worse than I'd imagined. It wasn't one dead animal. It was dozens of them. Deer, mostly, but also smaller creatures, raccoons, possums, even what looked like a black bear, all in various stages of decomposition, some fresh enough that flies still swarmed around them, others reduced to bones and fur. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that none of them showed signs of predation or disease. No bite marks, no obvious injuries, no indication of what had killed them. They were just dead, like they'd all wandered into this ravine and simply laid down to die. "What do you see?" Patricia called from above. "Dead animals," I called back, not wanting to worry her with the details. "Lots of them. We should probably report this to the Park Service." That's when I noticed the cave. It was hidden behind the pile of carcasses, just a dark opening in the ravine wall that I might have missed if I hadn't been looking for the source of all these dead animals. The opening was maybe 4 feet high, just big enough for a person to crawl through. The smell was definitely coming from inside. I should have climbed back up right then, should have packed our gear, and left immediately. But curiosity got the better of me. I clicked on my flashlight and crawled into the cave. The tunnel was short, maybe 10 feet long, before opening into a larger chamber. My flashlight beam swept across smooth stone walls, a floor covered with what looked like dried mud, and in the center of the chamber, something that made my blood freeze. Bones, human bones, arranged in careful patterns across the cave floor like some kind of ritual display. Skulls placed at precise intervals, ribs and leg bones forming geometric shapes, all of it old and yellowed with age. But these weren't ancient remains. Mixed in with the bones were scraps of modern clothing, a hiking boot, a piece of flannel shirt, what looked like a park ranger's badge tarnished black with age. I was backing toward the tunnel entrance when I heard it. Breathing, not my own labored gasps, but something else. Slow, rhythmic breathing coming from deeper in the cave. There was another chamber back there, hidden in the darkness beyond my flashlight beam. That broke my paralysis. I scrambled backward through the tunnel faster than I'd ever moved, scraping my back raw on the stone ceiling, and climbed out of that ravine like something was chasing me. "We're leaving," I told Patricia when I reached the top. "Right now." "What did you find down there?" "I'll tell you in the car. We need to go." Patricia could see the terror in my face and didn't argue. We broke camp in record time, throwing gear into the Explorer with no regard for organization. I kept glancing back at the ravine, expecting to see something crawling out of that cave, but the meadow remained peaceful and empty. We were loading the last of our gear when Patricia grabbed my arm. "Listen," she whispered. From the ravine came a new sound. Not breathing this time, but movement. something large shifting around in the darkness below. Then a scraping noise, like claws on stone. We were in the Explorer and driving away, before whatever was down there decided to come up and investigate us. The drive back to civilization took 3 hours over those rough logging roads, but we didn't stop once. Patricia tried calling the Park Service on her cell phone as soon as we got signal, but they said they'd look into it and get back to us. They never did. We reported what we found to the local sheriff's department as well, but the deputy who took our statement seemed more interested in whether we'd been drinking than in the details of our discovery. He said they'd send someone to check it out when they got a chance. I've searched online for any mention of missing persons in that area, but found nothing recent. The cave bones could have been there for decades, victims of whoever or whatever has been using that ravine as a hunting ground. Patricia and I still go car camping, but we do a lot more research now. We stick to established campgrounds with other people around, and we never, ever camp anywhere that smells like death. Because now I know that some places smell that way for a reason, and sometimes the thing causing the smell is still there, waiting in the dark for the next curious travelers to wander into its territory. Whatever lives in that cave in Miller's Hollow, it's been there a long time, and it's very good at making people disappear without a trace. Listen, I don't care if you believe me or not. I know what I saw up there in the North Georgia mountains, and I know what almost happened to me and my sister. The police didn't believe us either, said we were probably just spooked by local hunters or maybe some kids playing pranks. But hunters don't move like that, and kids don't have eyes that reflect light in the dark. My name's Rebecca, and I'm a nurse practitioner from Atlanta. Last October, my younger sister Carmen convinced me to try car camping for the first time. She's one of those outdoorsy types who does marathons and rock climbing and posts Instagram photos of herself on mountain peaks at sunrise. I'm more of a wine and Netflix person, but Carmen had been going through a rough divorce and needed some sister time. It'll be therapeutic, she said. Just us, nature, and no cell service so Derek can't keep texting me about the custody arrangement. Carmen picked the spot, somewhere in the Chattahoochee National Forest, near the South Carolina border. She'd found it on some trail running forum, where people shared hidden gems for overnight camping. The description mentioned an old Forest Service road that led to a primitive camping area with access to several unmarked trails. The drive up was beautiful but took forever. We followed increasingly narrow roads through dense forest, climbing steadily into the mountains until my ears popped. Carmen's Jeep Wrangler handled the rough roads better than my sedan would have, and she was in her element, pointing out different tree species and talking about elevation gains. "This is perfect," she said when we finally reached the camping area, a small clearing surrounded by towering pines and rhododendron bushes, remote enough for solitude, but close enough to trails if we want to do some hiking tomorrow. We set up our sleeping area in the back of the Jeep. Carmen had this whole system worked out with a platform and memory foam that was actually pretty comfortable. She'd brought a camp stove, good sleeping bags, even a portable coffee maker, because she knows I'm useless without caffeine. The first evening was exactly what Carmen had promised. We cooked pasta over the camp stove, drank the bottle of wine I'd brought, and talked about everything except her divorce. The sunset through the trees was gorgeous, and as darkness fell, the forest came alive with sounds: owls calling, branches creaking, the distant rustle of small animals. "See?" Carmen said, settling into her sleeping bag. "This is so much better than sitting in my apartment obsessing over legal documents." I was actually starting to agree with her when we heard the first footsteps. They were human footsteps, no question, not the random scuffling of animals, but the deliberate rhythm of someone walking on the trail that passed near our campsite, which would have been fine, except it was nearly midnight and the footsteps were moving fast, really fast. "Trail runner," Carmen said when I mentioned it. "Lots of people do night runs out here. Ultramarathon training, you know? They use headlamps. But whoever was out there didn't have a headlamp, or if they did, they weren't using it." The footsteps passed our campsite in complete darkness, moving at what sounded like a dead sprint through terrain that would challenge most people in broad daylight. "That's weird," Carmen admitted. "Running these trails in the dark without lights is basically suicide." The footsteps faded into the distance, and we tried to go back to sleep. But 20 minutes later, they came back. Same fast pace, same direction, like someone was doing laps on the trail system. This time we both sat up and listened. The runner passed within maybe 50 yards of our campsite, and I could hear their breathing, deep, rhythmic inhalations that sounded more like panting. like a dog running hard. Should we call out? I whispered. Make sure they're okay? Carmen shook her head. Something feels off about this. Let's just stay quiet. The runner passed by 4 more times that night. Always the same route, always the same impossible speed through darkness. By morning, neither of us had slept much. Maybe it was different people, Carmen suggested over coffee, like a relay team or something. But we both knew that didn't make sense. We spent the next day hiking some of the marked trails, trying to enjoy ourselves despite our sleepless night. Carmen was in her element, scrambling over rocks and identifying wildflowers, while I focused on not twisting my ankle on the uneven terrain. It was on the way back to camp that we found the first marker. Carmen spotted it, a small cairn of stacked stones beside the trail, with what looked like fresh scratches carved into the top rock. Not random scratches, but deliberate marks. Symbols. That's new, Carmen said, examining the cairn. These trails get maintained by volunteers, and they wouldn't add unauthorized trail markers. We found 3 more cairns on the way back to camp, each one marked with the same strange symbols. They were spaced at regular intervals, like waypoints marking a specific route through the forest. Geocaching, maybe? I suggested. People hide things and leave clues for others to find. Maybe, Carmen said, but she looked troubled. That night, we decided to stay awake and try to get a look at whoever was running those trails. Carmen positioned herself with binoculars at the edge of our campsite, while I sat in the Jeep with my phone ready to call 911 if needed, assuming we could get a signal. The footsteps started again around 11 p.m., right on schedule. Carmen tracked the sound with her binoculars, trying to spot the runner in the darkness. There, she whispered suddenly. I can see movement on the trail. She handed me the binoculars. It took me a moment to locate the figure, but when I did, my blood went cold. It was definitely human-shaped, but wrong somehow. Too tall, moving with a gait that didn't look quite natural, and it was moving faster than any human should be able to move through that terrain, bounding over obstacles with an almost animal-like fluidity. Jesus, I breathed. What is that thing? Carmen took the binoculars back. I don't know, but it's not alone. She was right. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could see other shapes moving through the trees parallel to the main trail. At least 3 or 4 figures, all moving with that same unnatural speed and coordination. They weren't just running the trails, they were hunting something. We need to leave, I said, right now. But Carmen was transfixed, watching the figures through the binoculars. They're following the cairns, she said. The stone markers we found, they're being used as waypoints. That's when one of the figures stopped directly across from our campsite and turned toward us. Even in the darkness, I could see its eyes. They reflected our campfire light like an animal's eyes, glowing pale yellow in the dark. But they were too large, too intelligent, too focused. It was looking right at us. Carmen, I hissed, we're leaving. Now. She didn't argue this time. We threw our gear into the Jeep as quietly as possible while the figure watched us from the tree line. I could feel its gaze like a weight on my back as I rolled up our sleeping bags. The Jeep started on the first try, and Carmen drove out of there without headlights, navigating by moonlight until we reached the main forest road. Only then did she turn on the lights and accelerate toward civilization. We drove in silence for an hour before either of us spoke. What do you think they were? I finally asked. Carmen shook her head. I don't know, but those cairns weren't there for geocaching. They were markers for something else, something that hunts at night. We reported what we'd seen to the Forest Service the next day, but the ranger who took our statement seemed more concerned about whether we'd properly extinguished our campfire than about mysterious figures running trails in the dark. Probably just local folks who know the area well, he said. Some people grow up in these mountains and can navigate them blindfolded. But that explanation doesn't account for what we saw. Those weren't local hikers familiar with the terrain. Those were predators using the trail system for something we were lucky not to discover. Carmen hasn't gone car camping since then. She sticks to established campgrounds with other people around, and she never goes into the woods without a group. She removed the location from her trail running forum posts and warns other runners away from that area when they ask. We've both tried to research similar sightings in that part of Georgia, but found nothing concrete. Just scattered reports of hikers feeling watched, trail runners who quit using certain routes, the occasional missing person case that never gets solved. I think about those glowing eyes sometimes, and the intelligence behind them. Whatever we encountered that night wasn't just using the trails randomly. They had a system, a method, probably prey they were tracking through the forest. And if we hadn't left when we did, I think we would have become part of their hunt. The mountains are full of predators. Most of them are bears and coyotes, and other animals you can understand. But some of them are something else entirely, and they've learned to use human infrastructure for their own purposes. Stay out of the deep woods at night, and if you see cairns marking trails that aren't on any map, turn around and go home. Some routes aren't meant for people like us.